you know, we have more than anybody. But I see them testing. I say, well, if they're going to test, I guess we have to test. I'd like to see a denuclearization because we have so many, and Russia has so many. Russia's second and China's third, and China will catch up within 4 or 5 years. I think de-escalation would be, they would call it denuclearization, would be a tremendous thing. And it's something, we are actually talking to Russia about that, and China would be added to that if we do something.
I think it is an obvious and logical thing to ensure that our weapon systems work as they're designed. I have a big Air Force base in my district, Barksdale Air Force Base. It's the home of the Global Strike Command, 2/3 of the nuclear triad commanded there. And our airmen and all of those involved in our nuclear arsenal need to be well practiced, and they certainly are. They're ready and prepared, but we need to make sure that we know that we can maintain our strength. And I think that's an obvious and logical thing to do.
It's concerning that the president thinks that we need to resume the testing of nuclear warheads, something we haven't done in over three decades. The only country that really benefits from this, forget about the North Koreans for a second, but the Chinese. And they haven't tested in decades. We don't have a need to test our nuclear weapons. We can model this stuff. When we say we're going to start testing weapons, the implication is the Chinese says, okay, we'll start testing our weapons. This benefits the Chinese. We know our systems are reliable. If they start testing again, they could build greater reliability into their strategic forces, all legs of it.
Yeah, it appears that the resumption of nuclear testing would be a massive breach of international treaties that have been in place for decades. And it's just another example of Donald Trump and Republican policies going too far, being divorced from reality, and that Donald Trump and Republicans are not focused on the main thing that the American people want us in the Congress to address, which is why, as Democrats, we're going to continue to relentlessly focus on driving down the high cost of living in this country and fixing the healthcare system that Republicans have broken.
We have a big arsenal, obviously. The Russians have a large nuclear arsenal. The Chinese have a large nuclear arsenal. Sometimes you've got to test it to make sure that it's functioning and working properly. We know that it does work properly, but you got to keep on top of it over time, and the president just wants to make sure that we do that.
Moments before entering this consequential meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping, President Trump announced that he had instructed his Department of Defense to immediately resume testing nuclear weapons, something the United States has not done in 33 years. Now, later, he was asked why this change in posture while standing next to the Chinese leader.
Mr. President, why did you change your nuclear plans? Why are you going to be doing more nuclear testing?
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now, this announcement came after Russian President Vladimir Putin announced that Russia had successfully tested both a nuclear missile and a nuclear torpedo. And China, they have been expanding their nuclear stockpile at a rapid rate.
From the nation's capital, this is the National News Desk, America's News Now. I'm Dee Dee Gatton. Thank you for joining us. And President Trump now just moments away from meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping as the leaders of the world's two largest economies look to ease tensions. Let's go straight to the live desk with Ryan Smith for the latest from South Korea. Ryan?
And we start tonight in South Korea live, where it's just after 11 a.m. President Trump at this hour right now meeting with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping at that air base. You see a live picture right there where it is all happening in Busan, South Korea. Xi Jinping walking into that building just moments ago as we were coming on air, in fact. And of course, there is a lot out there to talk about. A months-long trade war dragging on, tensions over TikTok, Taiwan, and fentanyl. And as soon as we get word of anything being discussed behind those closed doors, we will, of course, be right here to bring it to you live as it happens. Now, a trade agreement will help China avoid a pending additional 100% tariff on all imports, meaning Beijing would be facing upwards of a 157% tariff in total. In return, the U.S. wants access to China's rare earth minerals. Following 2 days of negotiations this week, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent struck a positive tone, saying He believes that the two economic superpowers set up a, quote, substantial framework for an agreement. Now, the deadline for a trade truce here is just days away, November 10th. Again, we are watching this live camera here at that air base in Busan, South Korea. And any live updates we'll bring you throughout the night from South Korea right here at the live desk. And we want to mention just before the meeting tonight, President Trump announcing right here on Truth Social that he has instructed the Department of War to begin testing nuclear weapons effective immediately. Now, this would mark a major shift in U.S. policy where testing has not been done in more than 3 decades.
My source tonight is the former Deputy Director of National Intelligence, Beth Sanner. And Beth, I'm so glad that you're here because I want to just read this entire post from the president from a few moments ago, because I think there's a few things in it that aren't true. And I'm very curious for your thoughts on this, because he said at 9:04 p.m. as he's on the way in South Korea to go meet with Xi Jinping, that the United States has more nuclear weapons than any other country. He says this was accomplished, including a complete update and renovation of existing weapons during my first term in office. Because of the tremendous destructive power, I hated to do it but had no choice. Russia is second and China is a distant third, but will be even within 5 years. Because of other countries' testing programs, I've instructed the Department of War to start testing our nuclear weapons on an equal basis. And he says that process will begin immediately. First off, Beth, is what the president says in this post true? And secondly, what do you make of this announcement?
Well, you know, who has more warheads, nuclear weapons, Russia or the United States? Technically, Russia has a little bit more, but it also depends on how you count and what is an active warhead. And, you know, it gets kind of complicated. And I think that basically the United States and Russia are at parity. You know, if you can destroy the Earth, you know, many, many times over, it really, you know, we're talking about angels dancing on a head of a pin. And China being a distant third is true. But my big picture here on the nuclear testing is this is something that you know, real hawks like Ambassador Bolton really pushed for in the first administration, and the president didn't do that. And I personally believe that it is a bad idea to go forward with U.S. nuclear testing, and here's why. Sure that there are constraints on us, and you know, there are people you can argue, you can have discussions about this. There are constraints by us not testing. But when the United States tests, you basically give carte blanche to everyone else. And the reason that we don't test is because we've tested more than pretty much everyone else. We did thousands, over 1,000 at least, tests during the Cold War. And we have computer simulations, and real experts say, like, we don't really need to do that. Do you know how many tests China has done? 50. We've done thousands, 50. Or at least over 1,050. So when you say that we're going to test, you're now allowing China to test.